Hey everyone, today's Sparta, a land where silence spoke louder than words, where discipline forged warriors, and where the heartbeat of a nation was the march of soldiers returning from battle. Welcome, dear audience, to Sparta, the Quiet of Lacedaemon, a journey into the soul of one of history's most enigmatic city-states. For centuries, Sparta stood apart from the world around it. While Athens built grand temples and celebrated philosophy, Sparta forged an empire of discipline, strength, and unity. Here, life was not about personal glory. It was about the survival and honor of the whole. In this journey, we will walk through the dusty training fields of the Agoge, stand beside Spartan mothers bidding farewell to their sons, and witness the thunder of shields on the battlefield. We will uncover the traditions, the laws, and the silent power that made Sparta a legend. So, settle in. Listen closely, for in Lacedaemon, words were few, but deeds shook the world. In the southeastern Peloponnese lies a valley cradled between the rugged peaks of Mount Taygetus and Mount Parnon. This was Lacedaemon, the homeland of the Spartans. The Eurotas River cut a silver path through fertile plains, its waters nurturing olive groves and vineyards. But beyond the fertile heartland, the surrounding mountains formed a natural fortress. The land was both a blessing and a challenge. It protected its people from invasion, yet its isolation fostered a culture inward-looking and fiercely self-reliant. The sea was far to the south, and Sparta's gaze seldom turned to trade or naval expansion. Instead, their focus rested on the land, their warriors, and the preservation of their way of life. In the early days, small villages dotted the plain. Over time, these settlements united under a single political entity, driven by necessity and the will to survive. The unification forged the Spartan identity, one tied intimately to the soil, the river, and the mountains that framed their horizon. Lacedaemon's quiet beauty hid a people destined for power. Here, amidst fields and stone, the Spartans shaped a society where endurance was prized, where silence was a virtue, and where the very earth seemed to hum with the promise of strength. Before Sparta became a name feared across the Greek world, it was steeped in legend. The Spartans traced their bloodline to the Heraclidae, the descendants of Heracles, the great hero who defied gods and fate. According to myth, after Heracles' death, his sons wandered in exile, destined to reclaim their rightful lands. Guided by prophecy, they journeyed south into the Peloponnese, where they would found Lacedaemon. The name itself came from King Lacedaemon, son of Zeus and the nymph Taygete, who married Sparta, daughter of Eurotas. Together, they gave their name to the land and its people. Such myths were not idle tales. They anchored Spartan identity in divine origin and heroic virtue. In this legendary past, kings were chosen not merely for their rule, but for their lineage. The idea that the Spartan kings descended from the gods gave their word authority and their presence weight. Every battle, every law, every sacrifice carried the echo of these origins. For the Spartans, their myths were not separate from reality. They were a living history, guiding laws, customs, and the unwavering belief that, no single figure shaped Sparta more than Lycurgus. Part lawgiver, part visionary, and part enigma, he transformed a loosely organized society into a disciplined military state. His origins are uncertain, and many historians debate whether he was a single man or a composite of leaders across generations. But to Spartans, Lycurgus was the architect of their way of life. Legend says Lycurgus traveled widely, to Crete, Ionia, and even Egypt, studying systems of law and governance. On his return, he reshaped Sparta with a single guiding principle: the good of the whole above the desires of the individual. The agoge, the communal dining halls, the equality among warriors, all were his creations. He introduced the Great Retra, a constitutional framework given, they said, by the oracle at Delphi herself. It bound kings, elders, and the people in a balance of power rare in the ancient world. He forbade the use of gold and silver, replacing them with heavy iron bars as currency, making wealth both impractical. When his reforms were complete, Lycurgus left Sparta, vowing not to return until the laws had taken root. He never came back. His absence became his final gift. Ensuring that Sparta lived by his laws for centuries, the Great Retra was more than law. It was the heartbeat of Spartan society. According to tradition, Lycurgus received it from the oracle of Apollo at Delphi. It was not written on parchment, but spoken, meant to be remembered and lived. Whitverve, this oral constitution set the foundation for governance, war, and daily life. Under the Great Retra, power was shared between two kings, a council of elders Gerousia, and the assembly of citizens Apella. The kings commanded the army and oversaw religious rites, won battle, while the elders proposed laws and served as judges in capital cases. The Apella, made up of male citizens over 30, voted on proposals, though without debate. Spartan efficiency allowed little for wasted words. The Retra also decreed that the city should have no walls, and, best, for its defense, was to be the courage of its warriors. It enforced unity by requiring citizens to eat together in communal mess halls, fostering equality and brotherhood. In this way, the Retra turned Sparta into a machine, disciplined, cohesive, and built for endurance. Every law was crafted to serve the state, every citizen molded to fit the needs of the whole. The Great Retra was not simply obeyed, it was lived. Kino. Spricasem, the purse, the fertile lands of Messenia, lay to the west of Lacedaemon, a prize too rich for Sparta to ignore. In the Bat century BCE, the First Messenian War began, pitting Spartan hoplites against the fiercely independent Messenians. The war was brutal, fought over years of sieges, raids, and pitched battles. When Sparta finally emerged victorious, they did not simply claim the land, they enslaved its people. These enslaved Messenians became helots, bound to the land they worked, providing the agricultural backbone of the Spartan economy. The helots allowed Spartan citizens to focus entirely on military training, but they also became a constant threat. Outnumbering the Spartans many times over, they were watched with suspicion and kept in check by force. The Second Messenian War erupted a century later when the helots rebelled. Led by the hero Aristomenes, they fought with ferocity, but Spartan discipline and unity prevailed once again. These wars cemented the Spartan system. Every boy in the agoge, every soldier in the phalanx, knew that the helots' submission was essential to Sparta's survival. From that time onward, the helots toiled in silence, their rebellion crushed, their freedom lost. In the quiet fields of Messenia, the roots of Sparta's military society grew deep. In Sparta, childhood was short. At the age of 7, every boy left his family and entered the agoge, the state's rigorous education and training system. There they learned not the arts of poetry or philosophy, but the skills of survival, obedience, and war. Life in the agoge was harsh by design. Boys slept on reeds they gathered themselves, wore a single cloak through summer and winter, and endured hunger so they would learn stealth in seeking food. They were taught to speak briefly and with wit, for in Sparta, words were to be sharp and measured like a spear thrust. Training was physical and relentless. Running, wrestling, mock combat, and weapons drills filled their days. But discipline was as important as strength. Punishments were swift, and even small mistakes were met with stern correction. The boys were grouped into herds under older youths, who acted as both leaders and examples. The agoge was not merely preparation for war. It was a forge that burned away weakness and individuality, leaving only loyalty to Sparta. Those who endured emerged as hoplites, men who would stand unflinching in the phalanx, bound by the unbreakable bond of shared hardship. Mythology. In most of Greece, women were confined to the home, but in Sparta, mothers held a place of rare honor. They were not warriors in armor, yet they shaped warriors from the cradle. Spartan mothers were known for their fierce pride and unflinching devotion to the state's ideals. From birth, infants were inspected by the elders. Weak or deformed children were left to die, for only the strong could serve Sparta. Mothers did not weep. They understood that survival of the city came before the survival of the individual. Spartan women were trained in physical exercise. Believing that strong mothers would bear strong children, they ran, wrestled, and threw the discus. Yet their greatest strength was in spirit. It was a mother who handed her son his shield before battle, saying, "With it or on it, victory or death." There was no shame in the latter, only in cowardice. When news came that a son had fallen in battle, a Spartan mother grieved in private, but rejoiced in public, knowing he had honored his name and his city. Through their words and example, these women preserved the warrior code that made Sparta feared in Sparta. Even meals were a matter of discipline. The Syssitia were communal dining groups where male citizens ate together every night. Admission was a privilege. Young men had to be unanimously accepted by the group, and each member contributed food from their own land. Meals were simple: barley bread, cheese, figs, and the infamous black broth made from pork, vinegar, and blood. Luxuries were absent, and conversation was measured. Here, warriors bonded not through feasting but through shared austerity. The Syssitia reinforced equality. Kings, elders, and common warriors ate the same food, sat on the same benches, and shared the same jokes and silences. No man could avoid participation. Absence without cause was considered dishonorable. It was in these halls that strategies were discussed, songs were sung, and the brotherhood of the phalanx was strengthened. The Syssitia was not merely about nourishment. It was a nightly reminder that in Sparta, no man lived for himself, while the kings commanded in war. The ephors governed daily life. 5 in number, elected annually, they held immense authority. Even over the kings, they could convene the assembly, oversee foreign policy, and act as supreme judges in civil matters. The ephors were also the watchmen of discipline. They inspected the agoge, ensuring boys met the exacting standards of Spartan upbringing. They could fine citizens, exile offenders, and even bring kings to trial. Their power kept the state balanced, preventing any one man from seizing too much control. Dressed not in finery but in simple cloaks, the ephors embodied Sparta's values: authority without ostentation, power without display. Their decisions shaped the life of every Spartan, from the humblest farmer to the most celebrated general. Sparta was unique in Greece for its dual kingship. 2 royal families, the Aeacids and the Eurypontids, ruled together, their power balanced by tradition and by the Gerousia, a council of elders. This system ensured no single ruler could dominate. The kings led the army in war and performed key religious rites at home. But their authority was checked by the Gerousia, made up of Ursabatmen over the age of 60, plus the 2 kings. The Gerousia proposed laws, judged the most serious cases, and acted as the guardians of Sparta's constitution. Membership in the Gerousia was for life, and its members were revered for their wisdom and experience. They were not merely advisors. Their word could overrule even the kings in matters of law. This balance of power, kings for action, elders for deliberation, was part of what kept Sparta stable for centuries. It was a government designed for endurance, not speed. A reflection of the Spartan character itself. A Spartan warrior was not defined only by his courage, but also by the tools of war he carried. The hoplite's armor was both a shield and a symbol, crafted with care to protect and inspire. At its core was the bronze cuirass, shaped to the warrior's chest, gleaming in the sun. The helmet, with its horsehair crest, transformed a man into a figure of fear, his face hidden behind a narrow visor. Greaves protected the shins, while a heavy round shield, the aspis, became an extension of his body. The shield was the most sacred piece. A warrior's life was tied to it, not only because it defended him, but because it defended the man beside him. To lose it was the greatest disgrace. The shield bore the lambda thibi, the mark of Lacedaemon, turning the phalanx into a wall of bronze. Each piece of armor was heavy, but the Spartan trained to carry it, as if it were part of his own flesh. Together, it gave the hoplite the strength to stand unmoving against an enemy charge. In Sparta, armor was not mere protection. It was the embodiment of unity, discipline, and honor. A Spartan warrior was not defined only by his courage, but also by the tools of war he carried. The hoplite's armor was both a shield and a symbol, crafted with care to protect and inspire. At its core was the bronze cuirass, shaped to the warrior's chest, gleaming in the sun. The helmet, with its horsehair crest, transformed a man into a figure of fear, his face hidden behind a narrow visor. Greaves protected the shins, while a heavy round shield, the aspis, became an extension of his body. The shield was the most sacred piece. A warrior's life was tied to it, not only because it defended him, but because it defended the man beside him. To lose it was the greatest disgrace. The shield bore the lambda thibi, the mark of Lacedaemon, turning the phalanx into a wall of bronze. Each piece of armor was heavy, but the Spartan trained to carry it, as if it were part of his own flesh. Together, it gave the hoplite the strength to stand unmoving against an enemy charge. In Sparta, armor was not mere protection. It was the embodiment of unity, discipline, and honor. The phalanx was the heart of Spartan warfare, a tightly packed formation of hoplites, moving as one. Each man's shield overlapped with his neighbor's, creating an unbroken wall. Behind this wall, the spears bristled forward like the teeth of a monstrous beast. The success of the phalanx lay not in individual heroics, but in discipline. Every hoplite had to hold his position, trusting the man beside him to do the same. A single gap could be fatal. Training in the agoge prepared warriors for this. Long hours spent drilling until movement became instinct. In battle, the phalanx advanced steadily, pushing against the enemy line with the weight of shield and body. Once contact was made, it became a contest of endurance, each side shoving and striking in a brutal test of strength, and will. The Spartans perfected this art, moving with precision unmatched in Greece. When the phalanx advanced, it was like a tide rolling forward, irresistible and relentless. It was more than a formation. It was the embodiment of Spartan unity. Before a boy became a full citizen, he had to prove himself through rites of passage. The agoge had hardened his body, but now his spirit was tested. Trials of endurance, cunning, and courage awaited. One such trial was the annual festival at the temple of Artemis Orthia, where boys competed in dangerous contests. The most infamous was the ritual whipping. where youths endured lashings without cry or flinch. The one who bore it longest was celebrated as a model of Spartan toughness. Other challenges included surviving in the wild for days without supplies, stealing food without being caught, and demonstrating mastery of weapons in mock combat. These rites were not mere tests. They were a declaration to the community, "I am ready to serve." Upon passing, the young man was admitted to a syssitia and took his place among the hoplites. From that day on, his life belonged to Sparta. These rites ensured that every warrior who stood in the phalanx had already proven he could endure hardship and fear without breaking. The Crypteia was Sparta's most secretive and feared institution, a rite of passage for the strongest and most cunning young warriors. Chosen by the ephors, these men were sent into the countryside armed only with a dagger. Their mission: to patrol the land, watch the helots, and eliminate any who might pose a threat. The Crypteia was part training, part covert control. At night, the young men hid in the hills, emerging under cover of darkness to stalk their targets. They learned stealth, endurance, and the art of silent killing. In daylight, they hid from the eyes of both helots and fellow Spartans, surviving with minimal supplies. This practice kept the helot population in fear and served as a test of the warriors' ability to operate alone without the safety of the phalanx. It was a harsh lesson. Not all returned. Those who did carried the silent authority of having served in the Crypteia. It was a reminder that in Sparta, war was not only fought on open fields, but in the shadows, where discipline and ruthlessness were equally vital. In c. BCE, King Xerxes of Persia marched into Greece with an army so vast that it darkened the horizon. To delay this tide, King Leonidas of Sparta led Sambit of his finest warriors to the narrow pass of Thermopylae, joined by a few thousand allies. Here, the mountains squeezed the land into a corridor where numbers counted for less, a place perfectly chosen for a stand. For 3 days, the Spartans held the pass. The Persian waves crashed upon their phalanx, but shield and spear turned them back again and again. Each Spartan fought knowing the mission was not survival, but time for the rest of Greece to prepare for the greater war. On the 3rd day, betrayal revealed a mountain path around the pass. Leonidas knew the end had come. He ordered most of the allies to withdraw, but the Sambir stayed, along with a few hundred Thespians and Thebans. Surrounded, they fought to the last, their shields splintered, their spears broken, their swords red with blood. The sacrifice at Thermopylae became legend, proof that courage could defy overwhelming odds, and that in Sparta, death in service to the city was the highest honor. A year after Thermopylae, the tide of war turned at Plataea. The Persians, though still powerful, faced a united Greek army under Spartan command. King Pausanias, regent for Leonidas' young son, led the Spartan forces. The battle was fought on open ground, a test of the phalanx strength without the shelter of a narrow pass. For days, both sides maneuvered, neither willing to commit to a full assault. Then, as the Persians attacked, the Spartans met them head-on. Pausanias led with discipline, refusing to break formation even under a hail of arrows. When the clash came, the Spartans' shields locked, their spears thrust forward in a wall of death. The Persians, less heavily armored, could not withstand the relentless push. Their commander, Mardonius, fell in the fighting, and his death shattered Persian morale. By day's end, the Persian army was in full retreat. Plataea was more than a victory. It was the final blow that ended Perseus' invasion of Greece. Under Spartan leadership, the Greeks had defended their land, and Sparta's reputation as the ultimate warrior state was sealed. By the late 8th century BCE, Sparta and Athens stood as rival powers. Athens commanded the seas with its mighty fleet, while Sparta ruled the land with its unmatched army. Tensions grew over influence and alliances, until in 4th century BCE, the Peloponnesian War erupted. The war was not swift. It dragged on for nearly 3 decades. At first, Sparta invaded Attica, devastating Athenian farmland. Athens retaliated by raiding the Peloponnesian coast and blockading trade routes. It was a war of endurance, testing each city's resources and will. Sparta's strategy was to force open battle on land, but Athens avoided it, relying on their navy and fortified walls. The Spartans, disciplined but unused to prolong campaigns away from home, found themselves frustrated. Still, their land forces could not be matched in direct combat. The war became as much political as military. With alliances shifting and betrayals common, both sides suffered from plague, shortages, and internal strife. The stage was set for a long and bitter struggle, one that would decide the fate of Greece. Though Sparta was a land power, necessity drove them to the sea. With Persian gold, they built a fleet to challenge Athens' dominance. The decisive moment came at the Battle of Aegospotami in 4th BCE, when the Spartan commander Lysander struck a crushing blow. The Athenians, anchored on the Hellespont, grew careless, believing the Spartans would not attack. Lysander seized the opportunity, launching a sudden assault. The Spartan ships rammed and boarded the enemy vessels, capturing nearly the entire Athenian fleet. With their navy destroyed, Athens was cut off from its grain supply. Starvation forced them to surrender the following year. The long war was over. Sparta had triumphed. For the first time, they stood as the dominant power in Greece, masters of both land and sea. Victory, however, carried a price. The years of war had drained their strength and sowed seeds of future decline. But for the moment, Sparta's supremacy was absolute in 4th BCE Athens. Once proud and unyielding, lay broken. The city's walls were torn down under Spartan supervision, and its fleet was surrendered. Spartan warriors marched into the heart of their former rival city, not as raiders, but as conquerors. Sparta installed the 30 tyrants, an oligarchic government loyal to them. Though short-lived, this rule marked Athens' humiliation and Sparta's apex of power. Yet even in victory, Sparta did not destroy Athens completely. They valued the balance of power in Greece, wary of leaving a void others might fill. The celebrations in Sparta were tempered by the cost of the war. Years of fighting had bled the population and strained the Helot-controlled farmlands. But for the moment, the red cloak of Sparta cast a long shadow over all of Greece. Athens would recover in time, but the memory of its defeat and of Sparta's discipline and endurance would never fade. With Athens defeated, Sparta stood as the undisputed master of Greece. Their influence stretched far beyond the Peloponnese, and their hoplites garrisoned cities from the Aegean to Asia Minor. Allies and former enemies alike bowed to Spartan authority, often with gritted teeth, but power brought arrogance. The Spartans, who had once shunned luxury and foreign entanglements, began to enjoy the spoils of empire. Gold from Persia and tribute from allied states flowed into Lacedaemon, eroding the austere values Lycurgus had set. Some warriors grew accustomed to wealth and discipline. The very soul of Sparta began to slip. Ruling a vast empire also forced Sparta into unfamiliar roles. Their military strength remained unmatched, but diplomacy and administration were not their strong suits. Discontent simmered among their allies, who resented heavy-handed Spartan control and garrisons. Though still feared, Sparta was no longer the lean, disciplined wolf of old. The seeds of decline had been sown. Even as the city basked in the glow of its greatest power, The Agoge had once been the forge of Sparta's greatness, producing warriors of unmatched discipline. But as wealth and comfort seeped into the city, fewer citizens submitted themselves fully to its rigors. Some wealthy families bribed officials to lessen their sons' hardships, while others avoided service altogether. The population of full citizens, the Spartiates, began to dwindle. Each loss in battle or refusal to complete the Agoge weakened the pool of trained warriors. The strict equality of Spartan men eroded as wealth became a greater dividing line than shared hardship. The Ephas tried to enforce discipline, but the system that had once been unshakable began to creak under the strain. Without the same relentless training, the Spartan army still fought bravely, but the old edge was blunting. This decline was slow, almost invisible at first, but it would have dire consequences when Sparta faced enemies who matched their courage with innovation. Thebes, long overshadowed by Athens and Sparta, began to rise as a new power in Greece. Under brilliant leaders like Epaminondas and Pelopidas, the Theban army developed new tactics to challenge Spartan dominance. Tensions erupted into open conflict in the Sambites BCE. The Spartans, confident in their old methods, underestimated their rivals. When they invaded Boeotia, expecting another swift victory, they found the Thebans ready and determined. The most famous clash came at the Battle of Leuctra in Sambites BCE. Epaminondas broke with tradition, stacking his forces deep on one wing and using elite troops to crush the Spartan right, the very place where their king stood. The Spartans, unused to such tactics, faltered. King Cleombrotus was slain and their line collapsed. The defeat at Leuctra was more than a battlefield loss. It shattered the myth of Spartan invincibility. For the first time in centuries, the wolf had been beaten head-on. The defeat at Leuctra had immediate consequences. The Thebans marched into the Peloponnese, striking directly at Sparta's heart by liberating Messenia, the fertile land that had fueled Sparta's rise for centuries. For generations, the Helots of Messenia had worked the fields under Spartan control. Their labor freed Spartan citizens to focus entirely on war. But now, with Theban protection, the Messenians regained their freedom, building a new city at Messene and fortifying it against future attacks. The loss was devastating. Without the agricultural wealth of Messenia, Sparta could no longer sustain the same number of full-time warriors. The economy faltered, and the already dwindling population of Spartiates shrank further. Messenia's liberation was more than a territorial loss. It was the breaking of Sparta's foundation. From this point forward, the city would never again hold the same power over Greece. In the wake of repeated defeats, Sparta faced the need for reform. Some leaders proposed changes to restore the city's strength, easing citizenship requirements, altering the Agoge to adapt to fewer numbers, and reforming land ownership to reduce inequality. But many elders resisted, clinging to the traditions of Lycurgus as sacred. To them, change was a betrayal of everything Sparta had stood for. This clash between reformers and traditionalists created political instability at a time when unity was desperately needed. Small reforms were attempted, but they often fell short. Land remained concentrated in the hands of a few, and the citizen body continued to shrink. The army could still fight, but it no longer inspired the same fear. Sparta, once the most disciplined state in Greece, now found itself torn between the memory of its glorious past and the reality of its weakened present. In the Greek world, no women had as much independence as the women of Sparta. While Athenian women were largely confined to the home, Spartan women could own land, manage estates, and move freely in public. This freedom came from necessity. With men constantly at war or in training, women ran the households and oversaw the helots who worked the land. They were expected to be physically fit, believing that strong mothers would bear strong warriors. Girls trained in running, wrestling, and discus throwing, often competing in public contests. Spartan women were also known for their sharp tongues. Their sayings became legendary, short, cutting, and full of pride. When handing a shield to her son, a mother might say, "with it," or "on it," meaning return victorious or be carried home dead. They were not warriors in armor, but they shaped warriors through their strength, wit, and unyielding loyalty to the state. In a city built on discipline, Spartan women were the keepers of its spirit. Into IB, religion was woven into the fabric of Spartan life. The Spartans worshipped many gods, but above all, they revered Artemis Orthia, the goddess of the hunt and childbirth. Sparta, her temple near the Eurotas River, was the site of important festivals and trials for young men in the Agoj. Rituals were not merely ceremonial. They reinforced discipline and unity. Before battle, sacrifices were made to seek the favor of the gods. Omens were carefully read. If the signs were unfavorable, the army would delay its march, no matter the urgency. Religious festivals, like the Carneia in honor of Apollo, could even halt military campaigns. During these celebrations, citizens participated in races, dances, and feasts, a rare break from Sparta's rigid routine. The gods were guardians of Sparta's laws and traditions. Disobedience to them was as unthinkable as treason. Even in the most desperate moments of war, the Spartans would not fight until the gods had been properly honored. Though known for austerity, Spartans did celebrate, but their festivals were as disciplined as their daily life. The Carneia and the Hyacinthia were among the most important, combining religious observance with athletic competition. During these events, normal routines paused. Citizens gathered to watch foot races, wrestling matches, and chariot contests. Music and dance filled the evenings, with choruses of young men and women performing songs that celebrated Sparta's heroes and history. Feasts were simple compared to other Greek cities, but they carried deep meaning. Shared meals reinforced unity, and victories in games were celebrated as victories for the city itself. The festivals also served political alliances were strengthened, and the youth saw living examples of courage and discipline in their elders. Even joy in Sparta was a tool for building the state. The Spartan code was not written on stone, but etched into every citizen's mind from birth. It valued discipline, loyalty, courage, and the subordination of personal desire to the needs of the state. Cowardice was the gravest sin. A man who fled in battle could lose his citizenship, his rights, and his honor. Bravery, on the other hand, brought eternal respect. Even in defeat, silence was a virtue. Spartans were trained to speak little and with precision, giving rise to the term laconic. They were expected to act, not boast. Wealth and personal comfort were considered dangerous temptations, and laws discouraged their pursuit. The code was upheld not only by the Agoj, but also by the family, the Sycia, and the constant watch of peers. It was both a burden and a source of pride, forging citizens who placed Sparta above all else. Even after its decline, Sparta continued to fight. In the 3rd century BCE, the city faced new threats from Macedon and the rising Achaean League. Leaders like King Cleomenes III attempted to restore the old ways, reforming land laws and revitalizing the Agoge. Cleomenes launched bold campaigns, briefly reclaiming territory and reviving Spartan pride. But resources were scarce, and enemies were many. In Abek Ashara BCE, at the Battle of Selagia, Sparta faced the combined forces of Macedon and the Achaeans. Outnumbered and outmatched, the Spartans fought with their old ferocity, but were ultimately defeated. This loss ended Sparta's independence as a major power. The city would survive, but only as a shadow of its former self, a place where tourists would come to marvel at its past rather than fear its armies. Yet even in defeat, the Spartan name carried weight, a reminder of centuries when their discipline and courage shaped the fate of Greece. By the 2nd century BCE, Sparta had lost its independence and fallen under Roman control. Yet the Romans, fascinated by Spartan discipline, allowed the city to retain some of its traditions. Festivals, the agoge, and public displays of endurance continued, but they were no longer preparation for real war. They had become spectacles for visitors. Sparta turned into a destination for Roman tourists, eager to see the famed city of warriors. Gladiatorial-style games and reenactments of ancient training were staged for entertainment. Spartan youth still raced, wrestled, and endured hardships, but these feats were now as much performance as practice. While Rome admired the Spartan past, it also made Sparta part of its imperial machinery. The city's decisions were overseen by Roman governors, and its role in politics and warfare dwindled to nothing. Still, the name of Sparta retained a certain mystique, and visitors left impressed by its storied history. As the centuries passed, the Roman Empire split, and Sparta found itself within the Byzantine realm. By this time, the city had changed almost beyond recognition. The old agoge was gone, the phalanxes long dissolved. Christianity replaced the ancient gods, and churches rose where temples once stood. The name Sparta faded from common use, replaced by Lacedaemon and later Mystras, a fortified Byzantine town nearby. Mystras became an important center of administration and culture, famous for its scholars, art, and orthodox monasteries. Though far removed from its warrior past, the spirit of resilience lingered. The rugged land and proud ancestry of the people were remembered in local traditions and folk stories. Yet, to the outside world, Sparta was now a ghost of history, a name from ancient scrolls, whispered alongside tales of Leonidas and the Sambe, chivalry. Over time, the reality of ancient Sparta became entangled with myth. Writers from other Greek cities, Roman historians, and later European scholars all shape the image of Sparta, sometimes truthfully, often with exaggeration. The stoic silence, the perfect discipline, the unbreakable phalanx, these became idealized symbols, with less attention paid to the harsher realities of helot slavery, rigid social control, and political suppression. To some, Sparta was the model of a virtuous society. To others, it was a cautionary tale of a state that sacrificed too much for military perfection. The most famous stories, like the Sambi at Thermopylae, were told and retold, often stripping away nuance in favor of heroism. While these legends preserved Sparta's fame, they also distorted it, creating a Sparta that never fully existed outside the pages of history and imagination. From military academies to sports teams, the Spartan ideal has endured into modern times. Nations have admired and imitated aspects of Sparta's discipline, training, and emphasis on unity. Military schools around the world have drawn lessons, both real and imagined, from the agoge, while athletes and coaches adopt the Spartan spirit as a symbol of endurance and teamwork. Yet the modern admiration often overlooks the less appealing realities of ancient Sparta. The rigid class system, the suppression of dissent, and the dependence on helot labor are rarely part of the romantic image. Instead, Sparta has become shorthand for toughness, self-control, and loyalty. In this way, the Spartans live on, not in their original form, but as an idea that inspires, challenges, and warns. Their legacy has outlasted their empire by millennia. In the early Eastern century, Sparta surged back into popular culture through films like Sambaid. Based on the Battle of Thermopylae, these films emphasized the heroism, sacrifice, and sheer physical power of the Spartans. Though often with more fantasy than fact, the imagery was unforgettable: rippling muscles, crimson cloaks whipping in the wind, and a king who stared down an empire with a roar. Audiences around the world were captivated, and the Spartan warrior became a modern icon of defiance against overwhelming odds. While these portrayals sparked new interest in ancient history, they also deepened the myths, the complex politics of the Persian Wars, the contributions of other Greek allies, and the reality of Spartan society were often set aside for the sake of drama. Yet, for better or worse, these films brought the name of Sparta to millions who might never have heard it otherwise, ensuring that the city's legacy, real and imagined, remains alive in the modern imagination. Unlike Athens, with its marble temples still standing, ancient Sparta left behind few grand ruins. The city's focus had always been on strength, not stone. Yet modern archaeology has uncovered fragments that speak of its past. The foundations of temples, the remains of theaters, and the stone walls of public buildings. Excavations have revealed the sanctuary of Artemis Orthia, where boys once endured the ritual whipping. Nearby, traces of the ancient agora hint at the public life of the city. Bronze weapons, pottery, and inscriptions provide glimpses into daily existence. Each find helps piece together the truth behind the legend. The artifacts tell of a people both practical and ceremonial, who valued endurance but also took pride in craftsmanship. Slowly, the silent ground of Lacedaemon speaks again, reminding the world that even a city without towering monuments can leave an enduring mark. Though centuries have passed, Sparta's values still resonate. Discipline, unity, and sacrifice for the greater good remain ideals in many cultures. The Spartan emphasis on endurance teaches that strength is as much mental as physical. Their laconic speech reminds us that words should be measured and meaningful. Their devotion to training shows that excellence is forged through daily effort, not sudden inspiration. Even their flaws, their rigidity, their exclusion of outsiders, offer lessons in the dangers of inflexibility. Modern life may not demand the spear and shield, but it still requires resilience. From the battlefield to the boardroom, the Spartan legacy challenges us to push beyond comfort, to value the team above the self, and to face challenges with unshakable resolve. Today, the valley of the Eurotas is peaceful. Olive groves sway in the breeze, and the mountains cast long shadows over the quiet town that bears the name of Sparta. The clash of shields has faded, replaced by the hum of daily life. Here, the silence tells its own story. The fields where hoplites once trained are now farmland. The river that reflected the shields of warriors now nourishes orchards. Yet the air still holds a weight, the memory of a people who lived and died for their city. In this quiet, the true meaning of Sparta emerges. It was never only about war, it was about unity, identity, and living with purpose. The modern visitor may not hear the battle cries, but they can feel the presence of history in every stone and breeze. The story of Sparta echoes in unexpected places, in military academies, sports arenas, leadership courses, and personal challenges. The phrase Spartan lifestyle has become shorthand for simplicity, toughness, and focus. This echo is not exact. The modern world adapts Spartan ideals to suit its needs. Soldiers may train with the same emphasis on unity. Athletes may embrace the same relentless discipline, but few would embrace the full rigidity of ancient law. Still, the image of the red-cloaked warrior, unflinching in the face of overwhelming odds, remains powerful. It inspires courage in those who face battles of their own, whether in war, competition, or personal struggle. Sparta's voice, though centuries old, still whispers, "Stand firm, endure, fight together." Legend says that when Xerxes demanded the Spartans surrender their weapons at Thermopylae, King Leonidas replied, "Molon lab, come and take them." These words have echoed through history, a declaration of defiance that transcends time and place. Leonidas' stand was not about winning a single battle. It was about showing the world that some things are worth more than life itself. His message was one of courage, unity, and unwavering resolve. Today, those words are carved into monuments, printed on flags, and spoken by those who refuse to yield. They remind us that while Sparta as a city has passed into history, the spirit of resistance it embodied is timeless. In the end, the last word of Leonidas is not just for warriors. It is for anyone who stands against overwhelming odds with unshakable will. Dear friends, thank you for walking with me through the story of Sparta. From its rugged birth in the valley of the Eurotas, through its centuries of discipline and war, to its quiet survival in history's shadow, we have seen how the Spartans lived not for themselves, but for their city, how their unity and endurance created legends that still inspire the world. Today, we have walked the narrow pass at Thermopylae, stood in the dust of the agoge, and felt the weight of the shield in the phalanx. But beyond the battles and laws, we have discovered a deeper truth, that the strength of Sparta was not just in bronze and spear, but in the shared belief that honor, loyalty, and courage could outlast death itself. As we leave Lacedaemon behind, may we carry a piece of its spirit with us, the resolve to stand firm in the face of challenge, the humility to serve something greater than ourselves, and the wisdom to know when to fight and when to endure. For though Sparta's walls were never built in stone, its legacy remains unbroken.